Great, I think we can get started. Hello, everyone. My name is Audrey Bolus, and I'm the Programs and Communications Associate at the Tahrir Institute for Middle East Policy. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our newest virtual panel, Violence Against Women in Egypt, Between Policy and Practice. 1 in 3 women worldwide experience physical or sexual abuse in their lifetime. Violence against women and girls is one of the most widespread, persistent, and devastating human rights violations in our world today. And this violence is severely underreported, mainly due to the pervasive impunity, silence, stigma, and shame surrounding these crimes. In Egypt, sexual and gender-based violence remains rampant despite legal and constitutional measures that, in theory, should increasingly protect women from such abuses. In 2021, the Egyptian government passed several new laws to address various facets of gender-based violence and to bolster women's rights in Egypt, yet too often there exists a significant gap between these measures on paper and in practice. So today, on the 15th day of the UN's 16 Days of Activism against gender-based violence, we're thrilled to have you join us as we examine how advocates for women's safety and empowerment can build upon new and older legislation in Egypt and improve upon measures that fail to sufficiently protect women, closing the gap between law and practice. As a reminder, today's conversation is being recorded. You can follow along and live tweet with us using the hashtag TIMEP events. And as audience members, we of course invite you to submit questions using the Q&A function on the side. So without any further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce today's moderator, Suzanne Gaber. Suzanne is an Egyptian-American journalist with a particular focus on the Middle East, as well as a producer at Truth Media. Suzanne, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Audrey. And before we start, I want to thank Audrey and TIMEP for organizing this. This is such an important topic, and Audrey's done such an incredible job making sure that we've made it to this point. So I'm going to introduce some of our panelists really quickly before we start our discussion. Habiba, if you want to, as I'm saying your name, wave or flag that I'm talking about you. So Habiba Abdelaal is a non-resident fellow at TIMEP, focusing on sexual and gender-based violence in Egypt. She is a public administrator and program specialist focusing on gender-based violence and women in gender studies. So thank you, Habiba, for joining us. Nashat is the advocacy coordinator at the Center for Egyptian Women's Legal Assistance, based in Cairo. So thank you for joining us, Nada, and thank you for bringing all your cats. And Amel Fahmy is the founder of Tadwein Gender Research Center, a leading feminist organization in Egypt, as well as a co-founder of HarassMap, an award-winning volunteer-based initiative fighting sexual harassment. So thank you, Emma. And Lobna Darwish heads the Gender and Women's Rights Department at the Egyptian Initiative for Personal Rights, which is such an important organization in Egypt and just had one of their fellow members released from prison. So that was a very exciting development. Thank you for joining us, Lobna. So I want to start off just a little bit talking about the different types of sexual and gender-based violence that we'll be addressing today, because it's such an large subject. And each one of these people that has joined us on the panel, each panelist has such an incredible breadth of knowledge in this area, but they're all going to kind of focus on different areas so we can address all of the sexual and gender-based, or as much as we can, of sexual and gender-based violence in Egypt. So I'm going to start off with Nada, and I'm going to ask you to tell us a little bit about draft personal laws of earlier this year, and perhaps how the issues, the new laws, if they address or fail to address larger situations that Egyptian women are facing on a daily basis, if they address sexual and gender-based violence well, and kind of explain to most of our audience first what personal status law means.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. Hello, everyone. Hope everyone is all right and well, especially in this weather. So just starting off with the personal status law, what is the personal status law? It's the law that governs or monitors the family issues. And it's the literal translation of the French law. Yeah, so the name, it's coming from the French. That's why it's not called the family law. It's called the personal status law. And we have 2 laws in Egypt. So we have one for the Muslims and one for the Christians. I want to focus on what's going on currently with the draft law. So the one that is still operating, it's 101 years old. And it was issued in 1920. It's still going on, and courts use that. So 1920, 1929, and then 70 something, and then I think 85, and then 2000s. All of these are amendments, whether to the alimonies part or to the custody, or so age of custody, instead of 7 and 9 to the kids, it now became 15. And lastly, in 2000, it was the khula was approved. But why, whenever why it's important to talk about person status law when we talk about sexual violence, or when we talk about violence against women in general? Because the person status law, it's the core of the private sphere. This is exactly what's how we want to see women. We need to look at what women, how their status in the family court, in the family code. And in the person status law, most women so far, especially Muslim women, in their laws, the problem is they're always treated as child vessels. So they are vessels. They are not citizens. We're not talking here about women or people with full power. It's not the same as the trade law, for example. In trade law, we're fully recognized citizens somehow. But when it comes to person status law, no, it's not the case. Up till this moment, verbal divorce is still something that is it's going on. Verbal divorce is when a man tells his wife, I divorce you. So it's a verbal thing. And this religiously, according to even Al-Azhar right now, according to the religious and some religious interpretations, this means divorce. Then how the state is responding to that? Because we need a law. The state says, well, you have a month to document it. Then what happened in this month? What if the man died? Is she divorced, or because she's divorced, however, in front of the or before the state, she's still married? Okay, then what if he never documented this divorce? How is this affecting women, whether social status or economic status? Because socially, she's still married, but legally, and legally she's still married, but in front of the religion, she's not. So this is causing some problems. From the other hand, she's not entitled to the post-divorce issues. Or her financial rights. She's not entitled to that. She's entitled to her rights as a wife. But then she needs to go to court in order to get all of these rights. And she needs to ask for the alimony. It takes around 1 year. Then what happens to women in this case? This sort of philosophy that governs the family law, it emphasizes on the fact that women are less than men. Women comes second. And most importantly, it emphasizes on the violence against women, the notion, the philosophy of violence, because it creates economic violence, it creates social violence, and it creates legal violence, legal discrimination. A man, if he wants to divorce his wife, it takes him only 15 minutes if he wants to do it legally. 15 minutes at the marriage registrar, and done, the marriage is over. But for a woman, it takes her around 3 to 4 years if she wants to get her post-divorce financial rights. If she wants to give that up, it takes her up to I think 1 year versus 15 minutes. So this kind of discriminations, it says something. It says that you as a woman, you're not important. Your life as a woman is not important. Your role is to be a mother. And that's why the law, for example, it keeps the custody with the mother till the age of 15 on one main condition, that she doesn't get remarried. So she has to give her life as a woman, as a wife, as a lover, everything she has to give up just to be a mother, as if the law, it says you cannot be both. And it treats men at the same time, the law treats men as if they are ATMs. Their sole existence here it's they have to provide financially. So they need to pay this, they need to pay that, whether for their wives or for the kids. But what about the responsibility of the upbringing of the kids? What about the responsibility of them as husbands? Where is that in the law? It doesn't exist. And it's not emphasized enough. Not the same as, especially with the religious discourse. It's not currently, they emphasize on you as a woman, you should adapt to violence because you need to keep the family. Whenever they talk, whether the state affiliated, for example, media or religious leaders or the state officials themselves, whenever they talk about the divorce, they talk about khul'a. They talk about divorce cases in court, but they never mention the unilateral divorce cases by men. Okay, they never mention the percentage. They never mention the problem of the fact that a man can divorce his wife in 15 minutes and then she has to run after him to get her financial rights. This concept, this is the core of violence when it comes to here. And that's why whenever we open a discussion about combating violence against women in the private sphere, we are faced by state officials and religious leaders telling us, well, you need to be more specific. What kind of violence do you mean? Because according to the penal code, Article 60, for example, this is, it says that if someone committed a crime with a good intention by a virtue given by Sharia law, for example, they will not be punished. And it's widely used when it comes to battery, when it comes to violence against wives, because in the classical interpretation, a man has the right to discipline his wife. In law school, we study this, the disciplining of wife. And this is catastrophic. To have this notion or to have this philosophy being perpetrated over and over and sent from generation to generation, and then we ask why we have high rates of violence, it's just crazy. This is from one end. So we have the Article 60 of the law. And the second point, and I'm going to wrap up here, it's again how legislators see wives, the role of women as a wife. Because whenever we talk about sexual violence in the private sphere, whenever we talk about marital rape, we are faced by a huge opposition telling us, well, there is nothing called marital rape. It's his right. As if she doesn't have the right to say no, as if she doesn't have the desire as well. And this also emphasizes the fact that socially, women should not be talking about their sexual desires, their sexual rights. Now, and some women starting to talk about their sexual problems if their husbands have a problem. But again, what if it's the other way? How are we going to treat that he's forcing her to have sex with him? Why are we using all the time that you should wait for him, just be beside him to have this, support him to do this and to do that. But whenever it's the other way around, get another wife, she's not enough for you. And this is another psychological violence put on women as well. So I'll stop here and give the floor to my colleagues, and if anyone wants to add on that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nada. I think something you said there, well, definitely marital rape is and marital violence is such an important topic that we'll get back to later in the discussion. But I think one of the things you said that Lobna, I wonder if you can expand on a little bit is that the penal codes, the way the legal system works, like those internalized things then play into that and don't favor women, don't tend to support them in cases of sexual violence or sexual harassment. And for women in Egypt, sexual harassment is such a prevalent thing. I think like every Egyptian woman I know can say that they've experienced it at some point in their life. So I wonder, Lobna, if you could tell us a little bit about, there have been a few high profile cases this year and a few like legal changes that have happened. What are those legal changes and how have they affected the landscape or the ability for women to speak up and like vocalize this abuse?
Thanks, Suzanne. I would like to start first by going a step back into the history of sexual harassment in Egypt and legalization and criminalization of sexual harassment in Egypt, because it's something that will tell us a lot about how to move forward. So basically, sexual harassment wasn't criminalized. It wasn't even recognized socially as a word, was not recognized socially as an issue, and it was basically hushed all the time. And every now and then, people will share some stories, and of course, on an intimate level with friends and family, that's one thing, but publicly, it was not a thing. And then in the 2000s, especially on the internet, and later on TV, after it tried to catch up with the internet and newspapers, we start hearing about stories of sexual harassment, women speaking up about their experiences, describing things, and women rights organizations and feminist groups start to speak up a bit and point and kind of almost like create in the public discourse the word for sexual harassment in Arabic, which is haruj jinsi, which back then people would refer to the acts of sexual harassment in the street either as with mu'aksa, which means either flirting or catcalling, depending on the context, which made it very hard for women to point at the problem. And sexual harassment became a word used gradually in the public sphere more and more by more women, and then afterwards in the official newspapers and websites and everything. But then came in a new trend, which is the mob sexual assault that would take place every Eid in downtown Cairo, especially. That's where it was documented in the beginning. And again, it starts with individuals publishing about this and almost officials denying that this ever happened, and that hurts the image of Egypt abroad and all that kind of accusations that we're accustomed to. And then after a while, it becomes recognized as an issue and start to be addressed. And we did that for years. All this is happening, but the law is not catching up. The law did not have a proper description for sexual harassment the proper description was introduced in the Penal Code in 2016. So from the early 2000s till 2016, it's women speaking up and trying to kind of defend themselves basically while speaking up. And even like there was like organized groups intervening, whether like online for advocacy or intervening in the streets against sexual harassment during Eids and during celebrations, while the law did not catch up with this with what's happening. And of course, it was called over and over a trend, Zahira, which is, they love to call it that, to make it basically disappear or to make it something temporal that it's not taking place. And of course, that was helped a lot with a lot of documentation of how prevalent sexual harassment is in Egypt in all spheres. And back in the time when we were talking mostly about sexual harassment in the streets and public transportation. And it was seen within that context. So when we see the description of the acts in the penal code, it reflects this point of view, that sexual harassment happens only in the street. It's not something that can happen in an intimate context, cannot happen in the workplace, or at least the penal code is not worded in a way that would help the recognition of these kind of sexual harassment and sexual violence in general in workplaces and families and schools and in intimate contexts, or friends or whatever, in intimate contexts. And then 2016, we have a proper description is introduced in the penal code. And this year, all of a sudden, we hear of a bill introduced in the parliament to harshen the sentences and penalties on sexual harassment. And in 4 days, it's passed by 2 committees, it's voted on, and it's published. Without any consultation with these women that been for so long had like accumulated so much knowledge on the ground of what sexual harassment means, and women rights groups and feminist groups who have been doing legal support and legal aid for years in these cases. So consultations with them would exactly point at where the law can address the problems. So basically, and this is a pattern I think that will appear in our conversation with other panelists as well, the state, when it basically the penalties in the very beginning, the penalty for sexual harassment was 6 months, maximum 6 months. And then with time, now it's like, it starts with 3 years. So 2 years of prison. And this pattern of like harshening the sentences, of prison sentences especially, is a recurring theme in everything related to gender in Egypt. So when there is a gender issue, women have a problem, other than marriage and divorce and the personal status law, because they don't touch that. The only tool, the first tool, and sometimes the only tool the state thinks of is the law. And the law in the form not of protection, not of services, not of any services that are basically committing services to women and girls, but penalties for the harasser, penalties for the whatever abuse it is. So, and that looks good. It looks amazing. And even many of our colleagues and friends have celebrated the harshening of sentences. But the problem is that I think anybody who's been doing legal aid on sexual harassment cases knows that's not the problem. The problem was not that the sentences were low. The problem was always with the process. And every step of the process is not an easy process at all, and puts you as a woman who's going to report a sexual harassment in danger. And the general environment in the legal system that you enter the moment you go to the police station to write a report about sexual harassment is mostly against you. It differs widely according to class of the victim and the harasser. It differs greatly about the place where you're going to file your report, whether you have a lawyer with you or not, whether like which background, which if you're Egyptian or non-Egyptian, which nationality are you, age, everything is reflected in how you're treated. It changes how you're treated in the police station, and then in the prosecution, and then later in courts. And there is another thing that has a big impact on how you're treated, is how you're perceived. Are you perceived as a modest woman? Are you perceived as dressed according to what's acceptable socially in the place where you are? Because this differs greatly between an urban area and a rural area, and each city and each neighborhood. So basically your experience is totally dependent on your background and on the harasser's background. And it becomes an issue of power. After all, at some point it becomes an issue of power. And so basically the whole process was full of like issues that, if addressed, can make women report more. Because for myself, the indicator for the success of a law to combat sexual violence would be the reporting rate. Not how many years someone is imprisoned, not anything, but the reporting rate of someone going to the police station till the conviction rate. And that tells me way more that women are using the legal system and using these legal articles to actually protect themselves, and they're used basically to combat sexual harassment. The issue is that when you have a culture, legal culture, as in the meaning as from the first police station, policeman that you meet till the judge, if you have an environment that's not very supportive of women's rights generally, and does not perceive women as equal to men, as Nada was just telling us, and does not really see its role in something like sexual harassment, like criminalization of sexual harassment, as an issue of paternalistic protection, in the meaning that they're not protecting women from violence. They're not protecting the integrity, the bodily integrity of women, or their dignity or whatever. They're protecting something else. They're protecting morality. They're protecting basically that certain women deserve protection from violence because they're good women. And this is something that will come again in our conversation, the issue of who's worth of protection and who's not worth of protection. I don't know if I'm running on time or...
No, you're doing great. If you have one more point, go for it. Yeah.
I have like one point that's very important. So for us, if there is anybody who wanted really to have high rates of reporting of sexual harassment, the first thing to do was the protection of identity of victims and witnesses, and protection of witnesses and victims. And this is something, for example, it tells you a lot about how the state writes its laws lately, when it comes to women especially. So last year, a legal article was amended to give basically anonymity and protection of information to victims of several crimes, including sexual harassment. But for all laws in Egypt that are amended right now has huge penalties, as we're seeing excessive penalties and harshening of the penalties with every amendment. This is the only thing that I've seen related to women that had no penalty. So there is a law that supposedly is supposed to protect these identities, But the public servant, whether a police officer, someone at the police station, or the prosecution who releases the personal information of the victim, is actually, there's no way to penalize them. So basically, it's kind of like practically an advice to them not to give the information out. And the information in sexual harassment cases, the information almost all the time are released to the families of the accused or the accused himself. And they start harassing or pleading to the woman who did the report to drop it, basically. And the level of harassment depends on which kind of accused it is and what kind of background they are from and her background and everything. But it can range from just phone calls and stuff like that, or going to her place or her parents' place, to threats. So you have a large scale of what basically make women think twice before reporting anything, because they know this is very common. And the release of information is not only about the release of the name and the photo, maybe if there is it's a big media issue, or the address or phone number of the victim, but it gets to the point in high-profile cases of sexual violence. It gets to the point with like the Q&A of the investigation at the police station and the prosecution is released to the media and printed in newspapers and published on newspapers' websites, and nobody is penalized for that. And this is not something that happens rarely or in few cases. It happens all the time. It releases very, very sensitive information and very personal information, photos, videos, lots of leaked, basically, as if the system collectively leaks the information of women and personal information to women and violate them even further than they were already violated.
And I think that's an incredibly important point that kind of addresses a question that was just submitted about retaliation against women, that I think that is a form of retaliation against women, that now they're more susceptible to death threats, to people having a lot of response to that in the public sphere that often is negative and it can like impact mental health. I saw that Habiba has something you want to add. Feel free to jump in.
Yeah, thank you, Suzanne, and thank you, Lobna. I wanted to add something to what Lobna said before we move to the next point, which is research has been done from Daftar Ahwal, and I'm sharing the link on the in the chat so that if someone is interested to take a look at the number of cases since 2015, from 2015 to 2019, and how it's really complicated. Like Lobna mentioned, it depends on like where are you and like how are you wearing and which police office did you go to. And yeah, this is one of the most researches that I found actually about the number of cases that got officially reported to the police regarding sexual assaults. So if anyone who are from the participants who are interested in doing more research, you can find it, and it's in Arabic. I shared it in Arabic, but you can find it in English too. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Habiba. I think while we're on the topic of the different forms of sexual violence, Lobna mentioned like online versus in the office or on the street. One of the other ones that is an issue that gets brought up a lot when we talk about Egypt is FGM and like how that plays into this. Amel, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the laws surrounding that and the culture of addressing FGM and where Egypt is at the moment with all of that.
Okay, thank you very much. Just before going on FGM, maybe I just add a bit of what Habiba and Lobna was touching upon, and I think one of the also more important thing that is the knowledge. And recent research, you find that the women themselves, some of them are not aware of the existence of the law, and don't know the procedures of how to really go and report. So also this is very important in the research, and maybe I can put it in the chat that we did. Actually, a really significant percentage of women who are highly educated, because this was a sample that we did online. So these are mostly educated women, graduate from university. They are not aware that there is a law against sexual harassment. They're also not aware of the different facilities like the hotlines that exist, despite the fact how functional it is or not, but also it's the tool that they don't know it exists. Other things like in the universities, there's the units for gender-based violence units, and across, I think it's around 24 universities in Egypt. And also majority of the university students don't know that this unit exists. So I think also this is another dimension to the issue. With, of course, the shortages of the law and protection of survivals during reporting, and also consultant and etc., but also the knowledge, and if we know that they also these services exist or not. So this is just one thing I wanted to add before going to FGM. So female genital mutilation, female circumcision or FGM, or female cutting, these are all like names for a horrible practice that's still going on in the 21st century. This is like there are at least 2,000 million women who have undergone this practice across 31 countries, and unfortunately Egypt is one of them. But not only one of them, but one of that classifies very high prevalence. We're at the 5th in the world, with the highest number in the whole world with women undergone FGM in the whole world, because of the population, of course. So we have around 87% of women in Egypt have been undergone FGM. And not only that, we have the majority of over than 50% of women and men in Egypt who will still continue and support FGM. This is really really unheard of, and it's very, I'm personally very ashamed to still stand around you and have every year I say the same numbers with the same things, and very little have been really achieved. What I wanna talk about is what Lobna touched upon. Is it's easy for the government when there is an issue, is just to issue a law, but then the law of FGM have been amended 3 times. I mean, every time it's trend. I know there have certain improvement, and I'll take you through it, but it's just, I think it's an easy way out for the state when they are cornered with a practice like that. I think it's just an easy way out, and hoping by doing the law that they also jump in the gender index, because you know we are at the bottom 5 countries in the gender index, and usually having legislation jumps you up. So if you have like 7 or 8 ministers, it jumps up. If you have legislation on violence, it jump up. So I think also it's an easy way to jump on the scale of the gender index. But I also want to question, is it also a failure, or it's a way of showing non-commitment of the state, or it's also a thing about ignorance of the state? Because I want to just throw it there, because it's a question and a debate that always goes in my mind. Do they really know how and they don't know it, don't do it, or it's partial that they really don't know what to do with it? You know, it's a cultural issue. It's part of the DNA of the society. Yes, it is, of course, a manifestation of gender inequality, power relation, issues of sexuality, but it's in the DNA of the society. So is it a way that they don't know how to do it, so they just say a law, or or they really don't want to work on it? So this is question. Maybe we just throw to debate further, and I can touch base on and see. I like, as a researcher, I can share some of my own personal views of where I think they fail. And I have to also mention that it's not only a state failure in Egypt; it's an international failure. I mean, and this is in 31 countries. The amount of money and funds that have been devoted to end FGM is humongous. It's huge, and from all the kind of developed countries. And also we should hold people like the UN agency accountable to what they are doing. Then the SDGs is there coming. It's 2030. They have been saying they're going to end it. And now they're saying none of the country were even close to achieving SDGs. The MENA region need to work 15 times more if they want to even come close to the SDGs. So also we want to throw them, but like the money and the funds that coming left and right, what are you doing with them? And to what extent these are cost effectiveness investment? And are you going in about the right approaches? Are you guiding the countries in the right approaches? I want to throw that because I want to widen the discussion rather than focus about what we're not doing, rather than what we can do, you know.
That's a great, I thank you for bringing that up, Amel. I think that's such an important point that we need to be looking more at. And if any of the other panelists want to chime in and give your perspectives.
Yeah, because I also know Lobna with us in the FGM task force, and she has a lot of input. So is Nada. So they also have been working on the issue on FGM. We all work on gender-based violence issues, so we can complement each other. So please feel free to jump in. So my thing is like, okay, let's go for the law, go through very quickly through the law, and then I'm gonna talk to you about the failures and how can we, in my opinion, make it better. So you know that we have the law. We have a quite in 2008, the first the law of FGM, and it's actually come and respond to an incident that happened in 2007 when Budur died, and it shows you how the state react rather than act. So it's always like that. You have the sexual harassment thing, and then the state react, and then you have the death of a girl that had been very blown out of proportion. There's like thousands of girls who dies we don't know about, and then the state react. So then it's reacted in the First Amendment, in the issuing the law in 2008. Then it's reacted again when another girl died by harshening the sentences. But the Third Amendment, which was 2021, these are the one we stepped in, like I think collectively, and we have been engaging with the state and saying, okay, now strengthen the thing, the sentences and harshen the punishment. But you have a loop here that says, for any medical reason. Please, there's no medical reasons for it, get it out. Put the responsibility on the medical personnel. We are the highest country in the whole world with the majority of FGM cases are being done by doctors. Hold doctors responsible. Hold the medical facility responsible. So we have been like negotiating with them and issuing statements as the task force, but also talking to them one-to-one in the corridors. And to some extent, really lobbying with MPs, to some extent that really kind of didn't fall, unfortunately didn't fall on a deaf ear, and they kind of took some of the recommendation. I know we wanted so strongly not to punish the parents because we have a very like reporting rates are really, really little. We have, over these years, we only were able to take maybe 6 doctors to, or 8, I think, 8 cases, but just recently we just have a conviction of a nurse. So we didn't want the parents to be convicted as well, because once the parents would be convicted, there would be no reporting, even in the case of morbidities or death. So the thing is here, yes, the state easy way out is to harshen the sentence and to keep amending the law. But then the work on the ground is very, very poor, really. So for instance, like there are 3 things. We have a strategy 2016 to 2020. Nobody kind of stopped and said, okay, it's ended, what we have done. Because if they have looked at that, which I have done in terms of, I have an analytical paper, you would find that apart from working on of the law, they harshened the law, but they didn't even do the reinforcement, ending the sociocultural environment, enabling sociocultural environment, they came closer, developing an M&E and producing knowledge, which is a huge important thing for us working on FGM. Didn't happen. We only have 1 survey till 2015. We still use its number till date. No quality, very few qualitative data. So also these are the issues in the strategy that was not really touched upon at all. Then with the kind of what kind of intervention or what kind of messages I'm really talking now. The National Council for Women, NCM, is the designated governmental body guiding the work on FGM with a committee that represents different ministries. This is highly regarded, also heavily funded by all UN agency as the like entity working on FGM. Very few funds go to the NGOs, and that's another story of shrinking spaces for NGOs working on violence in general, and specifically also on FGM. And then to what extent these entities are being held responsible or have been asked, tell us what you do. Because every time we sit with them and tell them what you're doing, they would say, we're knocking the door. They have a big program called Knocking the Door, which basically they knock the door and talk about different issues. And whether this is the right methodology to talk about issues that touch upon your own sexuality. I wouldn't say private and taboo, because FGM is not private and taboo, but it's an issue about sexuality. It needs people who are so convinced. Are you sure that people who knocks the door are themselves not practicing FGM? There are a lot of issues in terms of, is this the right methodology to be using or kind of promoted by the state as the methodology that we're using to combat FGM. So in terms of intervention and methodology, I think we need to really look to evaluate it and be very critical about it, because so far it hasn't been working. In terms of fighting fiercely medicalization, we have to do that. So entities like the Ministry of Health and entities like the medical syndicate should really be brought on board and working with. And universities, so far, we only have one university that have a curriculum, anti-FGM curriculum, which is University of Asyut, that have been really happened because of the task force, because it's a non-governmental effort that we worked with them, and they had now in place a curriculum. So intervention need to be evaluated and reshaped to be able to be more effective. And I have to say, as an like civil society, what we have right now is the virtual space. So we're working collectively on the virtual space, trying to spread new messages where it really holds men responsible, because always is the promotion of FGM is a woman issue. It's kind of a myth. No woman can take a decision about touching her personal organs, like sexual organs, without taking permission of a man. So the fact that we have been for years promoting that, targeting women, haven't been very effective if we don't talk to men. So working with men through the virtual spaces, younger men, especially that recent CEIP, not recent, the last CEIP survey said that 67% of young men will circumcise their daughters. So working with young men really is crucial, and we're doing that as NGOs, different NGOs, and through the cyberspace, because I mean, and it's like virtually is the only space we have right now to can work freely. We're producing knowledge. Us, like Tadwein has already done 3 qualitative studies in FGM for the past 4 years, that looking at medicalization decision-making process, and currently we're looking at links between sexuality and FGM. Because, and again, I want to say that producing knowledge is such a challenging thing, because the new law of the NGO prevent the NGOs from doing any research. And then getting the approval of a CAPMAS to do a survey it's impossible now. So we have to resort to qualitative and more of a like online surveys to get the data. So these are just the issues. And saying that, I have to say that sometimes we also need to see and work with the state to see, can we offer the knowledge and we're trying, like these are some that going and coming, but I also find that once they listen, things can happen. Like when they listen to negotiation during the latest amendment of the law, things have changed a bit. But to what extent we're able to push, that is a big question mark, you know.
So I have a question that came up in the chat that I think is really important, that you mentioned specifically not prosecuting the parents. And with FGM is such a specific thing that happens to much younger women. How does the reporting typically happen with that? Are parents the ones that are reporting, or like who's coming forward? And then why would we not want to prosecute parents? What in that would make reporting less?
Okay, I'll talk about that, but also Lobna feels so strongly about this point, so I also will give the floor later to her. So the thing is, like, I understand that how in the West, if you harm someone, like even if you are the parent, even you closest, you are supposed to be persecuted. And we, from a human rights perspective, that is very, very like how things should be. But the thing is, how the FGM is being framed and how the cultural interplay into the background, that nobody would really report the parents, because the law said anybody who escorts the victim will take up to 3 years. So if I report, I am a daughter, or I report, or my cousin report my parents, then my parents will go to jail. So that actually kind of decrease the possibility of reporting. And we have a lot of evidence on that. It's not like something we say, we just based on our evidence. We have, like recently, we have a case where the uncle couldn't convince his sister, and he called the child hotline, and then called us to help him. But he just didn't want, he wants to reach to them before they actually do the circumcision. So they then ensure that they will be, like, quote unquote, being to have a fear, like put fear or pressure on them, but not after, because he knows afterward means that they go to jail. So there are a lot of issues like that. So what we wanted to have, like, for instance, like a delayed sanction, that if you do it again, you're going to go to jail, or some penalties, hefty penalties, something like that. Not that they don't go unpunished, but then different punishment than jail, because that would decrease the reporting. But also maybe Lobna can really shed light. I know she feels strongly about that point.
Thanks, Amel. And yes, exactly like Amel said about the parents, but I would like to add that when you look at the cases that were reported till now, and Amel was telling us, like, we had 8 cases. We have like thousands of women, like girls, being cut, like on a yearly basis, more than thousands. Basically, we don't have the number for it, because it's not an updated number, but like it's a daily thing. But still, we have 8 cases since it was criminalized. And that tells us a lot that the law is there, it looks good, but it's not practical, it's not working. It's not working because of previous bad campaigning from the state side that focused mostly on the fact that to combat FGM, their main message was that it's usually done it used to be done by the midwife, who's like in Egypt, is usually an uneducated person, and used to say to people, your girl can die because of FGM. So the issue became that this woman who's not educated is doing the cutting, not that the cutting itself is bad. So, of course, parents loving their children think in reaction to, okay, I'm going to take her to the doctor. He's well educated. I'm going to pay him well because I love my daughter. I take care of her. Because FGM itself was not targeted as an issue, as a violation of this girl's rights. So FGM in Egypt is extremely medicalized. We're talking about like 82% of FGM that's taking place, according to the numbers of 2014, were done by doctors. So basically, this is terrible, of course, because it looks as if it gives it legitimacy. But at the same time, it gives us an opportunity that never happened before. We have a group of society that practices this thing, that goes to certain universities, has this one syndicate that can deal with them, have a place. I mean, the Ministry of Health is supposed to be overseeing them. And for once, we have those who do the act are identified as a group. Not all of them, of course, do it, but you can target them and you can talk to them and you can punish them as well because they're educated, they're supposed to know medically better, and therefore should be responsible for this violation. Basically, this is a practice they did not learn in medical school, and they're doing a medical intervention that does not exist basically in medicine. So this is a violation of their ethics as doctors. So the problem is that usually it's a parents going to a doctor and then doing the FGM, the cutting, and then everybody goes home. The 8 cases that we're talking about, almost like, if I'm correct, except for one, the girl died. So the issue is that the girl died, not that, no, I'm sorry, 6 of them. Not that the cutting was happening. So basically the penalty was about the death of the girl. And when the girl dies, what happened in most of the cases is that the parents go to the police station and report it because this doctor killed my daughter, basically. And they go there and then they learn that they're going to get themselves accused of participating in this crime. And once you know they're going to be put in prison as much as a doctor, your attitude changes. What you're saying at the police station changes. Nobody has evidence actually to convict this doctor later because everybody changed that basically their testimony in the police station and later in the prosecution and court. So basically the only way for this to end is to give ways for younger people, especially, not only the parents, but younger people, because the trends are clear that younger people are more inclined to be against FGM. We want the cousins, we want the neighbors, we want young people, an older sister, an older brother to be the one doing the reporting. And we know that nobody, I mean, especially in a context like Egypt, it's very hard to find somebody who wants to put their parents in jail. And I don't think it makes a lot of sense to know that your family, your own family will suffer a lot if the father is missing or the mother is missing because she's in prison. So that's exactly a good example of how things may look very good on paper. The law penalizes everyone, but in practice, when you look at the cases, when you look at the practice, you know that you've created a law that cannot be used. And I want to touch on something that Amel said about the international organization and UN organizations, which is really ironic and sad. So Amel was saying that the first law criminalizing FGM, or the one actually before the amendment of 2021, it included a short phrase saying without medical reason, which said that what's criminalized is doing the cutting without medical reason. And actually this is because of a mistake done by the WHO on its Arabic website. So the English website definition of FGM in it was one text, and the Arabic one included for no medical reason, which did not exist in the English website. So a state issued a law that basically hindered the criminalization of FGM for so long because the WHO thought that our Arabic audience needed to read something different than what's allowed and available in other languages. And that it's an irony how for years we've had this legal article because of such a small but meaningful, actually, mistake by WHO. And they never took responsibility, never apologized, by the way, because we addressed them about it.
Neda, I know that you said that you had something you wanted to add as well.
Yes, I wanted to add something here. It's because the easier way out usually is to increase the sentences and increase the punishment. The long way is to commit or to actually implement the commitments that Egypt has ratified to in the CEDAW Convention. Article 5 says that the state has an obligation to change or to develop the culture of the people. The question is, how is this happening? Harshening sentences is not how to change the culture of the people. It's not the essence of these international commitments. It's the fact that you need to go to schools, you need to go to the media. But again, as Amel and as Lobna said, how this issue is being addressed. We also work on FGM, for instance. What we hear from the women, we are a grassroots organization, so we're based in a slum area, basically. We hear from women completely different discourse from what's going on TV. Yes, it is about the purity of the body. Yes, it is about, for some of them, it's about religion, and they think it's religion who said that, but they do not address the small things such as her cousins never had FGM, and then her husband divorced her because she was uncut. This is not addressed by the state. It's not addressed that we have some women who believe that if a woman or if a girl is not cut, she will grow a penis. This is a cultural issue. It's not addressed by the state. These basic things that sometimes the more sophisticated, educated people just ignore to address, it creates a problem and it diverts classes and diverts people, those who listen to, I don't know, people who are educated and not educated. And this is not even the people who are saying this in school or raising awareness in schools. They don't believe that. people who were working, for example, and I know some of them back in my hometown, they were part of the National Council of Women, and they are firmly believers of FGM. So this is also another question to our state apparatus. Who are the people who are working for you? Who are these people? Are you sure that they believe in the same belief system that you are perpetuating? This is not happening so far. Yep.
Yeah, I think as we're talking about this, a lot of this is very institutionalized things that I think is the theme throughout all of this, that we need to be addressing the laws in the way that they're implemented. And I think, Habiba, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, we've seen a lot of very high profile rape and sexual assault cases in the last year that have been prosecuted in very different ways. And I wonder if you could talk about the discrepancy of how those laws are applied to different types of women or different women of different classes.
Yeah, thank you, Suzanne, and thank you for all my colleagues here for giving a knowledgeable brief about like the laws and the implementation of it. And I wanted to add actually a point before answering your question, and I think we're gonna get back to it when we start talking about myrtle rape, because when it comes to FGM and myrtle rape, it's more of a society crime. You can have as much laws as you can have, you know, but still what Neda said, it's mentally in the society that it's not a crime, and people have their own stereotypes about who doesn't do it or who do it. So like, it's really complicated because it's more a social problem before it becomes a crime. Like you can have, and we are gonna talk about myrtle rape more because we don't have any laws against it in Egypt. So, but yeah, I just wanted to add this comment before answering your question. I'm gonna be more focusing on actually, because my colleagues here talked about the laws and like the implementation. I'm gonna be focusing more on the survivors aspect and the witnesses aspect of the whole situation. And there hasn't been an organized justice system for women to seek help and get support they needed since 2011. We had a lot of nonprofit organizations and initiatives starting from the revolution, and they have been doing a lot of work and a lot of help to support women legally, physically and mentally. And adding to what my colleague said, it's a lot of them have been not working on the field anymore. And as Amel mentioned, we are mostly working online right now. And that has been putting more pressure on survivors to publicly discuss their rape and sexual assault cases and expose their personal information, traumatic stories, and intimate details on social media and going to the media, because the meth is, it's the only approach right now that is working. It's the only way and method that is working in terms of getting justice or seeking justice for women. How about the survivors that do not want to go public about their assaults? What are the tools they can use, where they should go to report? And if the answer is the police offices, so it's not the good answer here. Because as Lobna mentioned, we have a lot of challenges when it comes to police offices. And from the start of like your class, how are you wearing, where the situation happened, and you know how many women are willing to report sexual assault or harassment and go through this draining process of having to tell their story over and over in front of male officers who are smiling at their cases or even making fun of them or even blaming them. And some officers who are willing to write a report, but under a theft or robbery or whatever, but not under sexual assault, because it's gonna affect you and it's gonna affect your family. And they try to pressure women not to do it under sexual assault. the process, I thought the process changed, is going to change after having a law, but it's still really long process and intimidating for survivors. I can tell you a couple of stories that I know personally from my friends who went through the process and decided never to do it again. And if sexual assault happened to them, they will choose to let it go and forgive and move on, because of what they have suffered from the start of it, from having to grab the harasser or the perpetrator and help, like ask for the people's help to grab him with her and be a witnesses in her case and help her to get to the police office and then report it and then take it to the court from here. Women are afraid, and they have the right to be from reporting because of the state and the society pressure on them, because they have examples of women who decided to seek justice instead of being treated as survivors. They opened their lives to the public debate. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that who got publicly open, they got justice, because we had several of stories who got blamed, questioned, attacked, as the case of Sumaya Ubaid in 2017, the survivor who got sexually assaulted by someone. And the media, the first thing was the media labeling her as the Fatat al-Mall, or the mall girl. And she had to go publicly so that people could support her, and she got him sentenced, or she got him like in the court. And it didn't go like it from the moment she started speaking up, the media victim blamed her. There was a media a person who went through her phone and publicly her personal photos with her friends and stuff, trying to put the blame on her. And even after all of this shaming and blaming, she got him sentenced for 2 years. But upon his release, he followed and attacked her, causing her 20-centimeter wound in her face. I can talk from here to tomorrow about these cases, and like cases of going and speaking about your rape assault, and then you get arrested after it, like Minna Abdelaziz, who went publicly and did a video about her rape case and ended being prosecuted for inciting immorality and forgery of an electronic account. And Lobna can talk more about Minna Abdelaziz case after I finish. If you like, of course, Lobna, I don't want to put you on the spot. And don't even get me started back on the Vermont case and what happened to the witnesses from the moment of invading their privacy and going through their phones and homes to arresting them. So this is a clear message from the state to women and even witnesses who are willing to support and help women reporting their own cases. But I honestly wanna, on the other hand, I'm so thankful and appreciative for the organizations and initiatives that are still helping women that decided to go public, because it's one of the methods and it's one of the approaches that women are using right now to speak up about the incidents happening to them. They are doing a great job, but I'm just saying that this shouldn't be the only way for women to get justice for themselves by risking their personal lives and information, family, and by putting themselves on a huge public debate of, are they right or wrong?
And I think that's all of what you said is so important, but I think the ending there where you brought up some of the NGOs and other organizations that are helping, everything you mentioned applies also to marital rape to a like even larger degree, because it's not a legal issue in the same way. But I wonder what, for all of you, like what are things that we can do to be changing some of these cultural attitudes towards it, or like how we can be helping women even within the current system.
Sorry, you can go ahead, Lobna. I was just gonna add something about, like, since we are talking about the increased women access to justice. In my beliefs, it depends on three main directions, which is the enhancement of legal and justice services to be effective and gender responsive and accessible to women, and the establishment of gender justice specialists and advocates in the panel chain, and the development of legal awareness on women's rights and the mechanisms to their accessibility. And I think that what we have been talking about through the whole conversation. Yeah, sorry, Lobna, yours.
And when I think of how to move forward, I'm trying to kind of reflect a bit on the last 3 years, which have been like, I think in Egypt, especially 2020, one day would be recognized as a really like a moment that changed discourses about gender in Egypt big time. There was, and the awareness and who's involved and the movement building as well, because there was a huge change in who's now being involved and who's organizing. So I would like always to go back to the history of every improvement in women's rights in Egypt has been the fruit of the work of women and actually organizing, whether as a feminist movement or as human rights groups and women's rights group. So defending the right to organize and the right for feminist movements, and to make sure that this is not penalized, this is not, people are not intimidated, because we currently have actually a case where 2 women are being intimidated by lawsuit because of supporting victims of rape, actually. So making sure to support women who do the organizing, who do the support, and support the right of organizations and human rights groups to work. This is essential for me. For me, it's as long as we deal with gender-based violence or sexual violence, especially, whether like in the form of FGM or like sexual harassment, rape, whatever, as and issues in themselves, or like what they call them trends, they like to call them trends all the time, we cannot combat them. It has to be seen all the time as an issue related to where is the position of women in society. Equality for women is the question. And that's the problem with the state's intervention all the time in these issues. It thinks that without changing women's position in society, in the economy and socially, and in marriages and the institution of the family, it can't stop violence. These acts of violence are the outcome of where the women are put in the society. If they can think, and for example, to refer here to make something even outside of the marriage and everything, when the state was claiming to be supporting victims of sexual violence last year to speak up and go to the prosecution, the same prosecutor office was arresting women for dressing certain ways on TikTok and joking and whatever, and expressing themselves under basically a charge called violating family values, and putting them in prison up to 10 years in prison. We have Haneen Hossein has a child right now. She's her verdict is 10 years of prison. She's still going through the rest of the appeal system. But you cannot claim to protect women, or want even, because sometimes they want to, but they don't know how to do it. And that's the next point. You cannot protect women from violence without changing women's position in society and realizing and saying the message clear and loud that women's autonomy and bodily integrity are essential part of the framework of the state and how it sees women, which is not the case right now at all in any way. The next point is, I'll echo what Amel said. Knowledge is important. On one level, collecting information and data is important because the state on some issues do not collect the data. For example, FGM is an issue that we struggle with all the time because we keep referring to numbers from 2014, because the state stopped the process of collection of data, not only giving us the data as citizens of this country, but actually producing them. So even the government itself is creating strategies without having any data of what's situation currently on the ground. And as well, when you go to strategies, because with women, the state loves strategies. So they have plenty of strategies that do not get reviewed, that they're not reviewed, and the new strategy is unrelated to the previous one, and there's no evaluation for the first one, and we never know. So why have these strategies? Which information and knowledge from the ground are these based on? So listen to experts, work with civil society, which I'm saying it because it's the truth, but it's not going to happen. So working with civil society is essential, and listening to expertise, because laws written in vacuums to make statements do not work to protect women.
Can I just follow on what Lobna have said, because these are actually my recommendation. We have to understand, or like there is a long-term recommendation and multi-layer, multi-sectorial, that for instance, moving to a discourse of gender transformative approach. This is what we need to work. So you cannot just keep working on this and this and this. It has to be all gender transformative. That would take a long time in terms of changing. As well, but there are things we can do here and now that kind of push a bit the agenda. And one of the things is realizing how laws, exactly what I wanted to highlight, well, Lobna had it in my mind where you're talking, how laws and legislation on gender-based violence in Egypt is being drafted. Historically, have been always, as I said earlier, it's a reaction to something. You know, like FGM, it's because of the girl died. It's the sexual harassment because of the incidence of sexual harassment and the big noise that the NGOs have been doing. It's the protection of the witnesses is because of the Fairmont case. This has always have been a reaction, and as a result, this have been like really hastily crafted, very quickly drafted with the big loopholes in the penal code, and it done without any community discussion, without bringing the experts around the table to really sit and debate. Is this appropriate? Is it the right way to drafting it? Nothing. So I remember I've been invited by one of the NGOs to give a talk about laws and legislation, and that was one of my recommendations. So I said it's very important to bring the people who work on issues of gender-based violence on ground when you're sitting at the policy table. This is very important. And unfortunately, I had one of the, you can label whatever, I don't like labels, but you can call state feminists, who said, but if you personally have not been invited, it doesn't mean that other NGOs haven't been. So none of the task force member have been invited, who are just like represent the mega big 8 entities who works in issues of gender-based violence. So I was, at that time, I was not talking about myself, but I was talking about the human rights and feminist community that never goes like sit in the table with the state to discuss or work with a law. We just wake up in the morning and we know that a draft law is there that's going to be passed in the parliament. So, and then we just, oh, but wait a second, this is a problem. Wait a second, but if you did this, this will be a problem. And it's just like too late to even pass our notes. So this is very important. We have to be there at the table. We might disagree. You might have our ceiling as an NGO and feminist organization, human rights organization is higher than state. Everybody, it's all over the world like that. We're going to keep pushing. They're going to put us down, and then we're going to find a compromise area. But we need to be there. You cannot exclude us. You have to accept that we're there and we're there to stay. So this is one important thing. I think also. So we don't end up with I think the fragmentation of the penal code. We have one here, one there, one here. And I think that's why the NGO society in Egypt have been pushing for one comprehensive law on gender-based violence. Even if we cannot do one comprehensive law on gender-based violence, let's do one chapter in the penal code on violence against women. So, I mean, let's just put all the laws together to comprehend each other and just to address any loophole that is there. A clear definition of what is violence, what is rape. These are things that is important. We still have a really very bad definition of what is rape. So anybody who is like sodomy is not a rape in Egypt. So all that. So actually, if someone like sexually, they call sexual assault or it's never rape. Well, it's rape. So all these things we need to address in the gaps that we can currently address. This is something that is not like a long-term or error. This is something we can work on it right now. And a third thing I would say is really the training. I think training is a crucial training and knowledge production. Training, we say, how can we train all the judges? How we can train all the prosecutors? Okay, let's do something. Let's select some prosecutors, select some judges, train them, and then assign them to all cases of violence. That is a solution we can do, like train, and especially now that women are allowed gradually to the judiciary system, to train them, and then we have a special court that cases of violence goes to with these trained judges, with these trained prosecutors. So we kind of let's say decrease the amount of difficulties and hassles that the survival of violence goes through if it works with the trained officers from the start, and that would reflect on the increased number of the reporting if this happened. And then, as we always said, is the knowledge and information goes both ways. One, to let people know that these services existed and is available. For instance, UNFPA currently have these big projects with the different teaching hospitals, like a medical teaching hospital, that have centers on helping survival of violence, with the fridge to keep any evidence, with this and that, all these fancy things that nobody knows anything about it. Even us as an NGO, we don't know anything about it, so we can refer people. So where is the dissemination of knowledge to the survival of violence? That one section. And then the production of the knowledge, having to do more of a research, qualitative research, or even sitting with this, like us, three big organizations working on FGM, we haven't been invited right now. There is the equivalent of the demographic health surveys called the Egypt survey. One chapter of it is on FGM. None of us have been invited to sit and see what are these questions. They actually are making the module of FGM smaller. Another big study on FGM, only on FGM, is being currently carried by UNFPA and National Council for Women. Haven't been invited. We are the one who produced the majority of the knowledge on FGM in Egypt as NGOs, and we haven't been invited around the table. So production of knowledge, dissemination of knowledge, I think this is a third point that we can do to kind of try to speed up responses, effective responses to gender-based violence. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Amel. Nada, I know that you had something you wanted to add to this as well.
No, I can add them while we're answering the Q&As, because they already touch upon some of the questions here, so it's fine.
Great. Yes. So then let's open up to the Q&A. I'll go through some of these questions. These are some really thoughtful, amazing questions. So thank you, everyone. I think one of the things that we want to talk about also is, like, Sara said, what kind of services exist for girls dealing with domestic violence at home in Egypt? Whoever feels most comfortable speaking to that, or do any of your organizations in particular work with women that are dealing with domestic violence in their home?
Yeah, can I go? Sure. So yes, we deal with domestic violence, especially those who cannot reach, for example, the police or shelter. And now we face several problems in such cases. First of all, the response of the police usually is not as quick as in other crimes. If the violence is committed by the family, by not the husband, I mean by, for example, by the father or the brother, then we can get almost zero response, especially if it's the father. Because again, because of the patriarchal system of the family, that this is the father, he has the right to discipline you. And most probably, since you're a girl and your father is saying you're doing something wrong, it's your fault anyways. And again, this is the philosophy or how the culture actually is focusing on such help. So what happens exactly? When a girl comes to us and she's in a problem and she has escaped her house, then we used to have a shelter on our own, and then it was shut down by the ministry, and currently we are suing the ministry for it. But the state also has around 9 shelters, only 9 shelters across the country. But again, although there are 9 shelters, not so many women are in these shelters, so they are basically almost empty. And why is that? It's not because of the low rates of violence. It's because the procedures that the women have to go through in order to enroll in these shelters are horrendous. It's almost jail-like. And a lot of women, they would say, I cannot just go to the shelter. And even if she can, certain cases are not accepted by the shelters themselves, like incest cases. If she's pregnant, if she was raped and she's pregnant, they are not accepted in the shelters. It's almost, they are not allowed a phone. They are not allowed to go out at certain times. They are not, it is a prison-like. So again, if we want to talk about services here that are presented by the state, we need to talk about two things: the response and the protection. Laws are not enough, but the fact that we need to have some sort of quick response, especially from the police. The police really need some heavy trainings on that, especially when it comes to violence by the fathers or by the either parents, but usually by the fathers. They usually side by the father on that side.
Thank you for sharing that. That's invaluable information that I think we all appreciate you sharing. I think one of the other questions that we want to address is, we've touched on it a little bit, but I wonder if we could talk a little bit more. Sarah also had a question about the recent cases of the TikTok women, and we've mentioned like Mana Abdelaziz and Hanan and some of those women, but specifically as it relates to the sex trafficking charges, how those are implemented against women, and how we want to be, if there are ways that we can be combating that or supporting those women.
Okay. So very briefly, the TikTok cases and the trend of arrest that we're talking about is a trend that started in April 2020 and is still actually happening as we speak, of arresting women on content they post online, and especially on TikTok, the app, for dancing or, I don't know, dressing in ways that the state doesn't like, basically, or the prosecution doesn't like. And using what's very common, what's the common charge used against all these women were violation of family values, which basically is part of a cybercrime law, an article in the cybercrime law. So to cut the story short, it was a pattern of arrests, and in parallel with it, the prosecution, the public prosecutor Hamid Al-Sawi was issuing statements, talking to society about morality and how to raise the children, and how immoral these acts of posting these photos and videos online are. And in the beginning, against Hanin Hussein and Mawad Al-Adham and the three men who are with them in the same case, in the beginning, they were accused of violating family values, and in the appeal, they were acquitted, or and the case of Mawad, the jail sentence was cancelled. So the prosecution took them and put them in prison and put them on in trial with a new charge, which is human trafficking. And the case, we've worked on the case, we've worked on all the file of both cases. Human trafficking conditions, so the definition of human trafficking by law, the 3 points, basically it has to have like 3 points. The 3 of them do not exist in the case of Mawad Hanin. And the use of human trafficking was a very intentional move from the prosecution to scare people from supporting the women of TikTok, to mark them as doing a crime so horrendous as that trafficking in children, because literally, they're accused of this because, for example, Mawad was accused of human trafficking in children because she had a child who's her neighbor dancing with her in a video in a very childlike way that's very normal, and we see everywhere, and there's nothing even like that would raise eyebrows on it. But basically, the use of human trafficking was just like a media move, and it shows to what extent women in Egypt can be penalized for crossing certain lines, especially when they're like younger women from middle class and lower middle class or poor backgrounds. And you see the class differentiation because the same content can be posted by Instagram by a woman who's like more affluent, and nobody would notice and nobody would talk about it even. The other thing is like to add to TikTok, because I remember how you mentioned Minna Abdelaziz. So Minna Abdelaziz is a woman who spoke up, a young woman who spoke up against her rape and basically asked for help. And her rapists were like, and the people accused of raping her and violating her in different ways, because there were like multiple crimes, were all arrested, and she was arrested. And the witness who was supporting her were arrested. And the three kind of, the witnesses, the victim, and the accused were all put in pre-trial detention for months, actually. She stayed for 9 months, if I believe correctly. And she was accused herself and the witness of violating family values because she uses TikTok and because the way she dresses does not appeal to the prosecution. And you see how morality becomes a common thread over and over, and family values. Oh my God, I'm expecting 2022 to have like new development of family values, but we're asking about it. So family values and morality are the main trend in the attack against TikTok women, and there's no human trafficking.
I think one of the thing that you said that I think would be a great final question to kind of wrap up with as we're finishing our conversation. Osama in the chat had earlier asked about like what are cultural ways that we can shift this, because like that's a lot of what you're saying, I think kind of comes back to that when we're talking about family values, it's a very culturally based issue. How do we shift perspectives towards sexual and gender-based violence outside of just policy changes, or is it policy first and then? Neda, go ahead.
Yeah, it's not only, yes, policy needs to be amended as well, but also, I mean, we have a very important tool in our hands, which is the media and the cinema. And the state is investing heavily in the cinema right now, which is, but of course, it's in a certain discourse, but never on women's issue right now. And this is something that we need to focus on. Usually whenever, and currently for some reason, the drama, whenever they portray women's issues, with certain exceptions, except for some artwork, usually they deal with it as if it's a light issue or it's something to mock women for. And now the trend is to be anti-feminist. This is the new trend. It's like, oh, you've already gotten your rights, it's time to shut up. And now it's men's rights movement, which is, they didn't even think of what women are facing in the streets, especially when they portray issues on family laws, for example. It's wrong legally, that's number one, but also most of the time it portrays women as if she has to do something about it. It's never the other party's responsibility. Again, except for some drama work, the majority of the cinema is doing this. So this should be done. Educational curriculum, it should have special attention to gender roles and women's role in whether in the family and the patriarchal notion, it has to be addressed. But this has to be coupled by a strong will, a real will from the state. They can say whatever they want, they can portray whatever films they want, but then at the end of the day, when they issue a law or the proposal that was, alhamdulillah, that was killed before being submitted to the parliament, it's a family law that still treats me as a woman as if I'm a third-class citizen or a fourth-class citizen. It says something about who is really behind the legislations. So it needs to be, I mean, this is a whole process. It's not an easy process, but we're not going to, be silent about it.
Can I just add something? I just don't think it's something that we will do in Egypt that is different than any other country in the world. I mean, it just we are living in a global culture of violence towards women. It's not something. Yeah, Egypt, of course, is like it's peculiar among it comes at the bottom 5, but it's a culture of violence. It's a culture of inequality all over the world. None of the countries, including the Scandinavian country, have really achieved equality. So so I'm just saying that it is, we learn from historical endeavors all over the world that it is it's that the culture is not something that here it's static. It's something that we can change. So actually, sometimes people use the word culture as an impeding. It's something you should be frightened of. But no, culture is something that is very mobile and very changing. But also need a multi-sectorial and integrating approach. So I have to talk about legislation and policy, political will. I have to talk about shifting discourses, women's empowerment. I have to talk about challenging religious discourses. I have to talk about media and education. It's just have to be across different sectorial levels. And I think we're doing bits and pieces of everything. But I also talk about, I think it's also in Egypt, it's the issue of sustainability. Like we're not very sustainable in terms of the effort we're exerting. And I think we have been having a lot of challenges. Lately, in terms of shrinking civil society spaces, funding issues, political unrest. So we do have a different dimension than others or environment that we operate within its borders. But I really think, it's just like cliche when you keep saying these things over and over, but it's just really, it is the only way to change a culture of violence, just to work on these different levels.
Yeah, thank you, Amel. I'm gonna hand off to, I know Habiba had one more point, and then we're gonna wrap up with this discussion. Thank you all for being here.
No, I was just gonna add on the education part of like what Nada mentioned and what Amel mentioned before about having curriculums in schools and universities for to fight gender-based violence. And we already had this starting in 2014 when different organizations was focusing on having policies and having curriculums and to make it sustainable, like what Amal said, most of those organizations trained actually staff and faculty members in universities so that when we are not there anymore, that work should keep happening. So, but everything stopped because of the crackdown on the civil society. So if you're not gonna let the civil society do the job, you should be doing it yourself. So the thing is, education is really important, and like the cinema and the media is really important. And culture aspects and culture behavior changes, it takes longer time to change, of course, but it can change if it's all over the place. If the message is one message and it keeps getting to you from all over, like from the media, from the radio, from the school, from your university. So it can be happen, but again, if the intentions is to really change the behavior and the social behavior, yeah.
Thank you so much. I did think that's such a great point that we need to be combating it from so many different levels. I'm going to hand it back to Audrey. Thank you all for being here and joining us in this discussion.
Thank you so much, Habiba, Amel, Nada, Lubna, for sharing your insights today. And thank you, Suzanne, for guiding the conversation so well. We're really lucky to have you. I just want to add before we close out that today's event is part of a larger effort by TIMEP to program around sexual and gender-based violence in Egypt and in the region at large. This is often driven by our non-resident fellow Habiba Abdelaal, who we're so proud to have. And we certainly invite you to continue to follow our work, the work of her, and the work of our excellent panelists that you've heard speak today. And to our audience, thank you so much for joining us and contributing so much to this discussion. You make these conversations so much richer by adding your insightful questions. And I hate that we didn't get to everyone's questions, but we really appreciate your participation. And finally, a huge thank you to the TIMEP team involved in making this event possible. And I wish everyone a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful day.